I live in a quiet housing estate, but just a few places away from us stretches an endless belt of industrial halls. A few months ago, I took a night guard shift there in a huge warehouse. Monumental metal racks, 2 loading docks, 1 small monitoring corner, and not a living soul after 10 p.m. For me, an introvert, it was the ideal job. Routine patrols, a few signatures in the inspection book, otherwise, silence and time for my own thoughts. Mostly, the night dragged on slowly, but the open space and the monotonous hum of the air conditioning suited me, as long as I got paid on time. It was Thursday evening, and a downpour was raging outside. I kept an eye on the radar on my mobile phone, hoping the way home wouldn't be total aquaplaning. So far, the hall was only shaking gently. The lights flickered occasionally but held. Just before midnight, however, everything went out with one blow. No emergency lights flickered, just absolute darkness. I cursed because, according to protocol, restoring the electricity fell precisely to me. The manual stated that even before the circuit breakers, I had to manually disconnect several heavy packaging lines so that an accidental short circuit wouldn't destroy them. I turned on my flashlight, stepped out of the safety of the office, and my steps echoed under the high ceiling like an echo in a cathedral. The dense silence, devoid of the buzzing neons, suddenly felt oppressive. As I passed the first pallets, metal clanged somewhere deep in the hall, a sharp, piercing sound that couldn't be mistaken for thunder. At first, I told myself that the wind had thrown a loose ladder against the metal doors. But curiosity forced me to check aisle by aisle. As soon as I turned the corner, I caught a narrow cone of light for a moment, exactly like mine, which, however, immediately went out. At this hour, no one else should have been there, and my pulse quickened. I reached the place where I had seen the beam and found nothing, just a wall of boxes up to the ceiling. An unpleasant feeling that I wasn't alone overcame me. I wanted to dial the police, but I was afraid my supervisor would laugh at me for a false alarm. After all, they also paid me extra for the taser on my belt. Just then, a strange aroma hit my nose, a musty, metallic smell, like stagnant water in an old pipe. It led to the rear loading area, darker than the rest of the hall, where swarms of shadows formed between the wall and the vans. I shone the light on the concrete, and the dim light revealed a pair of wet shoe prints. There was minimal water in the building, so someone had just come in from outside. Logic told me to run and call 158 immediately, but the duty of a guard, stupid professional pride, and a drop of adrenaline pushed me to follow the tracks. I kept the beam low to the ground so as not to reveal my position, and step by step, I strained my ears. A whisper came from the front part of the racks, very quiet, but clearly 2 voices and tense. I turned off the flashlight, held my breath, squeezed the taser in my palm, and peeked out stealthily. When I stepped out of the shadow, there was nobody. The whisper stopped exactly when I swept the beam, as if the voice had dissolved into thin air. An icy heat shot through my temples. I decided to ditch all secondary tasks and head straight for the electrical switchboard. While I was fumbling with the fuses in the darkness, a rustle sounded from a few meters away, and something metallic rolled across the floor. I jerked the lamp and saw the edge of a crowbar. It had been lying somewhere else entirely before. I understood that things were getting serious. I rasped into the emptiness that I was armed, although against iron and an unknown number of opponents, my taser was a weak crutch. Despite my fear, I headed for the exit. Reputation or not, my own skin was more important. But I had barely run through a few aisles when, at the other end of the hall, a metal pallet fell with a clang, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps. I turned around. In the middle aisle, stood two figures, all in black. One held the same crowbar, the other just clenched his fist. But both charged at me before I could even take a breath. I ran in the opposite direction, stumbling on the slippery floor, zigzagging past the racks, hoping I knew the complex layout of the warehouse better than they did. Heavy breathing and the thudding of footsteps echoed right behind me. I could feel my heart in my teeth. After an endless minute, the noise receded. They had apparently gotten tangled in the labyrinth of racks. I hid behind a container of packaging, gasping for breath, and listened to see if they would return. The air smelled of rust, and my nerves were on edge. When it seemed they were gone, I rushed to the emergency door, opened it on the first try, and ran straight out into the downpour. Under the shelter, I immediately dialed the police. My voice was shaking, but the operator understood the seriousness. The patrol arrived surprisingly quickly, and the fact that the police officers went back inside with me and helped reset the circuit breakers gave me a feeling that I might just get through this. Of course, the uninvited visitors had long since vanished, taking a few more expensive electronic parts with them. However, my supervisor was not thrilled with my heroic escapes. I got a scolding from him in the tiny wooden shed that almost reduced me to ashes, and I was 1 foot out the door. In the end, he kept me on, but only on the condition that 2 guards would always be assigned to the night shift. So since that night, I sit there with a colleague, which is at least a small consolation. To this day, I don't know who those people were, whether they were random burglars or something more premeditated. The most chilling thing isn't even the run itself between the racks, but that moment when I heard a whisper in complete darkness, and a second later, nothing. As if someone was looking directly into my brain and stepped out of the light zone just when I wanted to reveal them. Whenever the lights go out during my shift, even for a second, my pulse doubles. And my palm automatically reaches for the taser. And although I'm now part of a 2-man patrol, in that immensely large silence of the metal racks, no presence feels large enough to drown out the memory of 2 dark silhouettes running straight at me with a crowbar raised to strike.
It was a dreary March evening, several years ago, and I crawled home just a few minutes before midnight after an exceptionally long and exhausting shift. I was bone tired. My head was buzzing and a dull ache throbbed in my legs. The longed-for vision was simple. Open a bottle of ice-cold beer, collapse on the couch, and for a few precious minutes, forget the whole world. That's exactly what I did. With the television off, just my eyes half closed and my feet propped up on the armrest. I let the cool, bitter drink trickle down my throat while I tried to quiet the endless thoughts about work, debts, and a solution that was nowhere to be found. When, after a while, I forced myself to reach for the remote control to distract myself with at least mindless channel surfing, there was nothing interesting to sink my teeth into anywhere. After a few minutes of aimless flicking, I resignedly turned off the screen and went to enjoy the silence instead. But peace and I apparently don't get along. I had barely put down the remote when a muffled poof echoed throughout the house, and all the lights went out. If you know that short, almost velvety crackle in the wires, you know what ran down my spine at that moment. Our dwelling had, for some reason, a talent for disconnecting from the grid whenever I was looking forward to a moment of peace. Reflex drove me to the porch to see if it was dark at the neighbors too. Outside, a cold March wind was whistling, but from one house at the end of the street, the light of a lamp shone. I knew immediately that this time it wasn't a widespread outage. Reluctantly, I turned back, but the handle of our front door suddenly seemed to be growing into the metal. The door wouldn't budge an inch. I tried several times, still locked. Confused, I banged my fist on it, called my wife's name in a low voice, but the answer was lost in the night. I examined the glass, but inside it was pitch black. I went around the house to the back entrance. That one was always unlocked. My wife often forgot to lock it, but now it sat in the frame tighter than a safe. An unpleasant premonition leaped in my throat. Along the walls, I ran to the external electrical box, and there my heart sank into my stomach. The garden hose, which I had diligently rolled up and hung that afternoon, lay uncoiled on the grass, right under the circuit breakers. Someone had gone to the trouble of cutting off the power supply. I ran to the nearest window and pressed my forehead against the glass. After a few seconds, my eyes adjusted to the darkness enough that I could see two nervously flickering cones of flashlights inside. Strange hands were ransacking our home right in front of me. I sharply turned to my pocket to pull out my mobile and call the police. But the phone lay comfortably on the couch next to the unfinished beer. I cursed, scenarios running through my head, and I was about to run to the neighbors to borrow his phone when a chilling thought struck me. My wife was sleeping upstairs in the bedroom, unsuspecting and defenseless. In a panic, I gathered a handful of small pebbles from the gravel edge and started throwing them at the bedroom window. The first, second, and then the third hit clinked loudly enough for the hinges inside to creak and a sleepy face to appear between the curtains. Quickly and as quietly as possible, I explained to her that there were thieves in the house and ordered her to hide in the wardrobe. Without protest, she disappeared into the darkness. Then I sprinted to the neighboring house, banged on the door, and between gasps, blurted out what was happening. The man immediately handed me his phone. I dialed the police number with trembling fingers. The operator promised a patrol as soon as possible. While I waited on his porch with a knotted stomach, I imagined the darkest versions of reality. What if the thieves had headed straight for the bedroom? The siren sounded sooner than I had hoped. I ran towards the patrol and briefly directed them. The men of the law ran inside, but when I caught up with them, I was greeted only by ransacked drawers and a draft from the wide-open back door. The robbers had disappeared, along with the television, jewelry, my old laptop, and other things I preferred to stop counting. My wife sat on the bed, trembling all over. The police officers gently asked her what she had experienced. Her story stabbed me in the heart. Just a few seconds after she had hidden in the wardrobe, someone had apparently kicked open the bedroom door, slowly entered, and she clearly heard him rack the slide of a firearm. Then, she said, he stood and absorbed the silence, as if hunting for the sound of breath. And just then, he must have heard the gravel I was throwing at the window. After a short pause, she said, the footsteps quickly ran out of the room. Since then, I can't shake the thought that the power outage and the locked doors were a calculated plan. The scariest thing is that we still live in the same house and aren't moving for the time being. Every time I remember that I stepped out for just a little while that night, I feel the same icy chill creep down my spine that I felt when the lights went out.
For as long as I can remember, I've lived in the shadow of my older brother. I'm not angry with him, I'm just stating a fact. His business took off successfully, while I've been struggling for 6 years to climb to the same level. When I completely bled out on rent, I had no choice but to pack my bags and return to my parents. I felt like a walking failure, so I decided to stay out of their way as much as possible. I settled in the basement. Thankfully, it was better furnished than many studio apartments. It had a mini kitchen, a small bathroom, a desk, a bed, and an old TV with my ancient video games. Thanks to that, I hardly ever went upstairs and didn't feel like a parasite. One weekend evening, it was Friday or Saturday, a proper storm broke out. It was pouring as if from a leaky bucket, rain drummed against the windows, and the wind howled so strongly it shook the whole house. I swear, it was one of the wildest nights I've ever experienced. My parents were away, so the whole house belonged only to me, which suited me perfectly. The basement was perfectly cozy, warm, with dim lighting and the roar of the rain, which sounded like a lullaby to me. I was just drifting into a half-sleep when suddenly everything switched off. The lights, the fridge, the television, and I was left in absolute darkness. I grumbled in annoyance, but then I told myself that the circuit breakers had probably tripped because of the storm. For a moment, I considered whether to go look for the fuse box, but I didn't feel like running around the house in such weather. And honestly, I didn't even know where those breakers were, so I decided to wait until morning. As soon as I lay down again, there was a strange deep bang against one of the basement windows, too sharp to be caused by the wind. At first, I thought a branch had broken off, but the sound seemed intentional, as if something heavy had hit the glass directly. I didn't want to get up, but a fallen tree is a bigger problem than a power outage, so I finally dragged myself out of bed. I switched my phone to flashlight mode, aimed it at the window, and carefully approached. That's when my heart almost collapsed. A man's face was pressed against the glass. His eyes were wide open, his skin white and wet, and for a brief moment, we looked directly into each other's eyes. Then, he jumped back and disappeared into the rain. I almost dropped my phone. My fingers suddenly went limp. I felt my blood pulsing in my temples, but I had no time to think because almost immediately I heard another sound, the creaking of floorboards above my head. Someone was moving around on the ground floor. The combination of what I saw and heard pushed me to the brink of panic. An unknown number of strangers had just broken into my house, and I was down here all alone. On top of all that, one of them already knew I was in the basement. My brain froze, but I had to act. I wanted to call the police immediately, but the power outage had knocked out the Wi-Fi, and I didn't have a single bar of signal underground. I was cut off from the world. In my head, I quickly ran through the options. I couldn't let them search the house and risk them coming to find me, but a frontal confrontation would be pure suicide. The only plan that made at least some sense was sneak quietly up the stairs, slip out the entrance, get a signal there, and call 911. I took a deep breath, started to tiptoe like a cat, and climbed to the top of the staircase. From behind the railing, I saw 3 people with flashlights moving stealthily through the dark ground floor. I remained pinned, not even breathing. The beam of light stopped for a moment on one of them. He was holding a gun. I froze completely, my muscles tensed like iron. During that, their muffled whisper was broken by a calm but chilling sentence. "Alex is in the cellar. Go find him." It took me a moment to understand that they had used my first name. How on earth could they know it? My throat tightened. I retreated back down the stairs as quietly as I could. Inside, however, I was panicking fully. I had a minute, 2 at most, before someone came down. Hiding was out of the question. A thorough search would find me. The only escape route was the small basement windows, but they had latches screwed in from the inside. In desperation, I grabbed a chair, climbed onto the windowsill, and smashed the glass with my elbow. Shards cut my hand and face, but adrenaline kept me on my feet. I squeezed through the broken frame, directly into the stream of icy rain, landed in the mud, and ran away while I still had a chance. I was sliding on the waterlogged grass, water and stinging wind lashing my body, but I kept going until my phone started showing at least 1 bar of signal. My fingers were trembling so much that I could barely dial the police. I explained what was happening and hid under a tree until the patrols arrived. They entered the house a few minutes later, but the thieves were long gone. They took so much that it's pointless to make a list. Suffice it to say that my parents just shook their heads in disbelief. The police confirmed that someone had first cut the power, perfectly planned. Mom and Dad were furious and threatened to kick me out of the house, saying I had let them get robbed. I begged them, explained that I really had no other choice. After a few days, they calmed down, but the tension remained hanging in the air. I myself am shaken even today, and what keeps me up at night the most is the question of who those people were and how they knew my name. Sometimes I lie in bed, remember that face pressed against the glass, and wonder how the story would have ended if I hadn't smashed the chair into the window in time.